Hi, everyone. Welcome to our fall speaker series. We're really excited to kick things off this year with Luke Mayville, who Lauren Finns will introduce here in a moment. My name's Kylie Brightsman. I'm the current president for the League of Women Voters here in Moscow. And so, as I said, this is our first of our speaker series going on this fall, and we have a lot of upcoming events that we hope you check out. I'll also give a quick plug that our candidate forums in Moscow are next week, Monday and Tuesday evenings from 7 to 8:30 p.m. at the fairgrounds. Monday night will feature county candidates, and Tuesday night will feature District 6 state legislature candidates. So if you have any questions about that, feel free to reach out. And with that, I'll turn it over to Lauren, who will then introduce our speaker for the day.
All right. Thanks, Kylie. Okay. Welcome, everybody. I just want to add my welcome and thank you to Luke for being here with us today. He was in Moscow on Monday night, gave a great presentation with his team, and we had a great turnout there. And it looks like we've got a good turnout today as well. So Luke is going to talk about Proposition 1, how the Open Primaries Initiative will give power back to voters. I'll give you a little background on Luke. He grew up in Sandpoint, so he's from Idaho. He holds a PhD in political science from Yale and recently taught civics and political philosophy at Columbia and Boise State University Honors College. He's written about the ideas of America's founding fathers, including a book on President John Adams. In 2017, he co-founded Reclaim Idaho, a grassroots organization that spearheaded Idaho's Ballot initiative to expand Medicaid coverage to over 100,000 Idahoans. In 2021, Reclaim Idaho won a landmark case in the Idaho Supreme Court that enshrined the ballot initiative process as a fundamental right in the state of Idaho. And last year, the organization led a campaign that successfully pressured Idaho lawmakers to make historic investments in Idaho K-12 education. Most recently, Reclaim Idaho joined a coalition of community groups and civic organizations in support of the Open Primaries Initiative, and that successful campaign resulted in Proposition 1 appearing on our ballots in the upcoming election. So we're really, really pleased to have you with us, Luke, and look forward to hearing what you have to say. So with that, I'm going to spotlight you, and you're on.
Well, thank you, Lauren, and thank you all so much for being here. I want to start by just stating really clearly what the problem is that Proposition 1 is setting out to solve. I want to tell you a little bit about exactly what the initiative is and how it works. And then pretty quickly, I want to open up and just hear from you all with any questions, any concerns, any comments you have related to the initiative with the goal of your ending this call with more knowledge than you had coming in, and especially if you believe this initiative is the right path forward for Idaho. I really want you to be able to go out and talk to people about it and feel like you have all the information you need to effectively go out and get out the word about this initiative, because that is the job of the Proposition 1 campaign between now and Election Day. Is it's really simple. It's just talking to voters, making sure that every voter knows about Proposition 1. Okay, so what is the problem that Proposition 1 sets out to solve? This is also known as the Open Primaries Initiative, and the problem is the closed primary election system. We haven't had closed primaries forever in Idaho. In fact, the current closed primary system has only been around for about 12 years. For the first election cycle, the primary was closed was 2012. This is only about 12 years ago. And the result has been that if you are an independent voter, you don't belong to a political party, you are blocked from voting in the most important elections, the most decisive elections, the elections that really choose who has power over our lives, who serves an elected office in Idaho. The only way you're allowed to vote if you're an independent voter in those elections is if you join a political party that you don't belong to. That is very clearly wrong to us. It's not fair. It denies over 270,000 independents a voice unless they're forced to join a party. So that is the core of the problem. But I'll just say the flip side of that same coin is another way of talking about the problem, which is that it's not just that voters are being denied a voice. It's that we're electing leaders who are not listening to the voices of all of the voters. They're not listening to the broader community. We are electing too many leaders in our state who are not, another way to put it, are not accountable to the broader community that they're supposed to serve. Instead, they're really only accountable to a very small number of voters who vote in the closed primary elections. And this tends to be a more hyper-partisan group of voters whose views and interests don't very well represent the views and interests of the larger community. So that's what this initiative sets out to solve, what Proposition 1 sets out to solve. It's all about giving every Idaho citizen a real voice in our elections. And it's about electing leaders who are really accountable to all Idaho citizens. Okay, so here's how it works. Here's how this initiative accomplishes this goal. The first part is the open primary. There's two basic parts to this initiative. The first part is the open nonpartisan primary. And here's how that works. You show up in the primary in May. There will no longer be different party primaries, Democrat, Republican, third party. There will no longer be party primaries. Everyone will vote in the same primary, regardless of your party affiliation. Everyone will vote in the same primary election, and all candidates, regardless of party, will appear on the same ballot. So let's say you're voting for governor. You might have 4 Republican candidates, 2 Democratic candidates, 2 independent candidates. They will all be on the same ballot together. All that you do as a voter when you show up to vote in the primary, choose your favorite candidate, that's it, and go home. Now, it's really important to recognize in a moment, I'm going to talk about ranked choice voting. There's no ranking in the primary that we're proposing. It's simply a pick one primary. Just choose your favorite candidate, and that's it. Now, the second part of Prop 1 is what happens in the general election. So when you show up to vote in November, here's how that will work. The top 4 candidates from the primary will all go forward to the general election. So those are the top 4 who won the most votes. And that can be from any party. So that can mean in Idaho statewide, for example, again, for a governor's race, you might see 3 Republicans and 1 Democrat. You might see 2 Republicans, a Democrat, and independent. Depending on where you live, if you're in a district where there are more Democrats, you might see 3 Democrats and 1 Republican. But it's just the top 4, whoever won the most votes. And typically in most places in Idaho, it's going to be a couple different Republicans, 1 Democrat, maybe 1 independent or a third party. All you do as a voter, once again, this is very simple. All you do as a voter is you can choose your favorite candidate if you want to, and that's it, just like a traditional election. But if you want to, you also have the freedom to rank up to 4 candidates. So you can also choose second choice, third choice, fourth choice. So you can choose only 2 if you want, or 3, but you can choose up to 4. You can rank them in the order of your preference. This is my first choice, my second choice, my third choice, my fourth choice. Once you've done that, that's it. And you go home. And and it's really important to pause here for a moment. That process I just now described, that's all, it really is as simple as that. So when opponents of this initiative say it's just too impossibly confusing, voters will never understand how to do this, it's just false. When they have done ranked choice voting in other states and other communities around the country, they've surveyed voters, and voters will say, for example, in Alaska or in cities in Utah, over 80% of voters surveyed said the process was simple and easy to understand. And it really is, because as we like to say, it really is about as simple as counting to 4. That's what you have to do. Just first choice, second choice, third choice, fourth choice. And again, if you want to, you have the freedom to only choose 1 or 2. However many you want, up to 4. So it's very simple. And voter confusion is not going to be a significant problem under this reform. Okay, the last part and this is the part that's a little more, that's a little newer and less familiar, is how the votes are counted. But bear with me, I think you're going to find that it's actually pretty simple once it's just clearly explained. So let me explain exactly how the votes are counted. And let me say first that there is an underlying principle behind this whole ranked choice system. And it goes back to the whole reason why we're doing this initiative to begin with that I talked about a moment ago. And it's the basic principle that we want to elect leaders who represent the broader community and not just one small group. We want leaders who represent the broader community that they're elected to serve, and not just one tiny group of voters. So we don't want leaders who have really only shown that they have support from 30%. We want leaders who have much broader support than that. And that's the underlying principle behind how it works. And you're going to see that when I explain exactly how the votes are counted. So here's how that works. The very first thing that happens is all of the first choices on the ballots are counted. Okay, just the first choices. Then and there, if someone gets over 50%, they're declared the winner, and the election's over, they're declared the winner. If no one gets over 50%, then it's really important that there's a second round of voting. Because again, we don't want to elect someone who's only shown that they have 30% support. We want them to have to show that they really have broader support. So if no one has 30%, it goes into the second round. And what happens in the second round is this. The last place candidate gets eliminated. If you voted for that candidate as your first choice, your vote now goes to your second choice on your ballot. Let me repeat that, because if you understand this part, you really understand the whole thing. The last place candidate gets eliminated. If you voted for that last place candidate as your first choice, your vote now goes to your second choice. Now, all that happens from there is that process just repeats. So then the third place candidate gets eliminated. And if you favored that candidate as your top choice on your ballot, then your vote now goes to the next choice on your ballot. And once there's only 2 candidates left in the race, whoever has the most votes wins. And any point in that process, as those rounds of counting are happening, at any point in that process, if someone clears 50% and they have over 50% support, then they're declared the winner. So you can see how that process, it's sometimes called an instant runoff. That runoff process that I just described of counting the votes in rounds, it guarantees that we elect leaders who have broader support. And I'll just mention really quickly, some people ask, like, why do the open primaries together with ranked choice voting? Well, this is where the state of Alaska had such a big breakthrough in proposing this system, which is we're modeling our reform after. They did a top 4 open primary, which means that the voters have very real choices. and that much better choices than currently when it's just one person from one party, another person from another party. You're going to have 4 choices, and you can even have multiple choices within one party. So there's very real differences between the candidates, and that really makes the election much more meaningful for the voter. But then once you have those 4 choices all going on the November ballot, you have to have a way to make sure they don't split the vote 4 ways. And again, as I've been emphasizing, you have to make sure you have a way that they don't split the vote so that the winner only has 30%. You want to make sure you're actually electing someone with that broader support. So that's why you have to add ranked choice voting to the process to make sure that once those top 4 candidates go on to the general election, you've got a way to avoid splitting the vote, and you've got a way to make sure you're electing leaders who represent the broader community. So that's the basics of how it works. And as you can see, this entire reform goes in the opposite direction. It goes in the right direction compared with the current system implemented 12 years ago, which restricted the voice of voters, that really narrowed the amount of voters who really matter in our political process, to just in many elections, just the small group of voters who participate in the closed Republican primary. That's who really matters now. It's about 20% of the population most of the time, 20% of the voters. That's all. Those are the only real voters who matter in our system. Proposition 1 takes us in the opposite direction. It restores the voice of all voters. And we emphasize those independent voters because there are a lot of them. Over 270,000 independent voters in Idaho. And that just so clearly captures how important this is. Because we are effectively restoring the voice of over 270,000 of our fellow citizens, and many of those of us who are part of this campaign are independents. But even if we're not independents, those are our fellow citizens and our friends and our family members. So we're restoring their voice. We're securing an election system where we elect leaders who respect the voice of every Idaho citizen. And we just think by pursuing these goals, by accomplishing them through this reform, this could really be the biggest game-changing positive reform in a generation in Idaho. So with that, I'm happy to step back and take questions. And please, no question is a bad one. If we can leave this meeting with you feeling more confident that you understand this initiative and you're ready to talk about it with others in your community, then that is mission accomplished.
Thanks, Luke. That was a really clear explanation. We really appreciate it. We have one question already in the chat, and before I go on with that, let me just say to everybody who's attending that you can either raise your virtual hand using the react button, and I'll recognize you, or you can put your question in the chat and I'll read it. So our first question is from Zena, and she says, how much support was there for the initiative process, and was it broad-based across the state?
Okay, so I understand that question to mean, in the signature drive, when we collected signatures to put this initiative on the ballot, which was for about a year, about 10 months between August and May of August of 2023 and May of 2024. We collected almost 100,000 signatures, and yes, it was very simple answer to your question. It was very broad-based. We collected signatures from all 44 from voters in all 44 counties. We had teams of volunteers in every region of the state. And sometimes those teams were hundreds of people. Sometimes it was 3 people in a tiny town somewhere working on collecting signatures in their town. But it was an incredible effort. In Idaho, you have to qualify by collecting signatures from 6% of all registered voters. And then you also need to collect signatures from 6% of all voters in each of 18 different districts. And we did that. We actually did 20 different districts, and that included districts everywhere around the state. I think there were at least 5 districts just in North Idaho, for example, another 5 in Eastern Idaho, and so on.
All right, great. And Zena also asks, if Prop 1 succeeds and wins on the ballot, what sort of threats will occur at the state legislature?
Well, we have no doubt that there will be legislators who try to repeal it. The Idaho legislature in Idaho does have the power to repeal initiatives. I'll say a few things about that. Number one, just because they have the power to do it doesn't mean they will do it. And we know that from Medicaid expansion. So in 2018, there were a lot of rumblings from legislators that they were going to repeal Medicaid expansion if we passed it. Back then, Raul Labrador, I think, was running for governor, and he said he would try to repeal it if it passed. They tried and they failed. They couldn't get the votes in the legislature to repeal it. And that was partly because it was so popular, and it was partly because those of us who worked on the Medicaid expansion initiative continued to put pressure on, continued to advocate for what we were doing and make sure that legislators understood that this really was the will of the people, and that the people are still watching. They're not just showing up to vote and then tuning out. So we'll do everything we can to protect this initiative, this reform in the legislature. And we do believe there's a path to forming a bipartisan coalition in the legislature that could uphold this reform. I'll also mention some other paths. As a last resort, Idaho does have a referendum process where if they were to repeal the initiative, we could potentially block that repeal by launching a referendum. That's number one. That would be a last resort. It would take an enormous amount of citizen involvement to pull that off. But another possible avenue is the state of Utah. Just this year, they had several years ago, they had passed an anti-gerrymandering reform through the initiative process. The legislature then watered down that reform. Just this year, the Utah Supreme Court stepped in and said, if the people of Utah pass a reform of their government through the initiative process, the legislature cannot simply restrict or repeal it in the same way they could some other type of law. If it's a fundamental government reform, the legislature does not have the right to do that. Our attorneys, our legal team, believes that same type of argument is available to us in Idaho and could very well win in the Idaho Supreme Court. So we're going to pursue every avenue possible to protect this initiative and protect this reform from being repealed. Well, and one other thing occurred to me while in that last point, they will sue in court. They will try to get the reform struck down. We're confident that those lawsuits will fail because we did the really hard work before we even filed the initiative of, the really careful legal homework of figuring out that this actually, all the aspects of this proposition are constitutional and will withhold any scrutiny from a court.
All right, great. I don't see any other questions in the chat, but let me ask one. So you said that one of the concerns that people have is that this ranked choice voting is going to be confusing, and it's actually not. What are some other concerns that people have, or confusions that they have about how this will work, that you've encountered in talking to people.
Sorry, could you, I missed that last part. Could you
Oh,
say?
yeah. What are some other misconceptions that people
Okay.
have about how this will work?
Yeah, so and this could be a good point, and this could be a good time to just go through some of the core opposition arguments that are swirling around out there. I didn't talk about the opposition arguments in my initial comments. Number one, there's a claim out there that's getting around that this is somehow a way to try to turn Idaho blue. And this is where you see a lot of references to California and things like that. Point number one, this does not resemble, the reform we're proposing does not resemble California's system very much at all. What we're actually taking after is Alaska, not California. California does not have statewide ranked choice voting. They have ranked choice voting in some cities, that's it, not all of them. And even where they have ranked choice voting, they don't combine it with a top 4 open primary. They do have a top 2 primary statewide, but that's very different from a top 4 open primary with ranked choice voting. So very different from California, and they're using California as a boogeyman. They understand that the conjuring up the image of California scares people, and that's why they're using it, but it's not rooted in the facts. It's also just simply not the case that this reform is about turning Idaho blue. In Alaska, when they passed this reform, the result was they then had an entire election cycle, and they elected the same number of Republicans and the same number of Democrats as before. So you need to know that, because a lot of the opponents latch on to one race in Alaska, the one with Sarah Palin, where she lost to a Democrat. And they try to claim this is all about turning Alaska blue and Idaho blue. You can always cherry pick, right? But that's not an honest argument. When you look across Alaska, they elected the same number of Republicans and the same number of Democrats, including in the state legislature. They elected, with this system, they elected a conservative Republican governor with this system. And that gets to the heart of what this initiative is about. It's not about benefiting one party or the other. As you heard my explanation earlier, it's about benefiting the citizen, the voter. And it's not about electing more of one party or the other. It's about electing candidates who represent the broader community, regardless of their party. So those of us advocating for this reform, we're not doing so under the hope that it's going to change the party balance in Idaho. We think the party balance will remain roughly the same. We're doing this because whether it's a Democrat or a Republican representing us, we want them to be leaders who represent the broader community and aren't just representing one tiny group of partisans. And that's what we believe we essentially have in Idaho right now, is a real misrepresentation, a corruption of representation, really, where leaders are only representing one small group. Okay, so that's one big misconception, and I spent a lot of time on that, so I'll just quickly say another big one is the cost. That there's a lot of people have heard that this definitely will cost, $40 million. And that's based on partly on a letter written by the Secretary of State. A few things are important to keep in mind here. The Secretary of State has said that that's a rough estimate based on the research they've done. We know from all of the careful research we've done that other states have done this very inexpensively. The state of Maine implemented ranked choice voting for $500,000, which is about 50 cents per voter. We also know that whatever it costs is a one-time cost. So there's a misconception out there that it's gonna be a recurring cost every 2 years and it's gonna keep costing the state. No, it's a one-time cost to get it set up. So that's another point. And number 3 to that, we strongly believe, and most Idaho voters will be persuaded by this, we believe, that it is worth some investment to secure the right of every voter to participate. So we believe it will be much less expensive than some of the highest estimates out there. But even if it is some significant investment, it's worth it to secure the right of every Idaho citizen.
Okay, thank you. Barbara asks, she says, it would be helpful to know what went into the decision to link the open primary initiative to ranked choice voting, as that seems to be the one thing that gives most people that she's talked to some concern.
So and I'll kind of elaborate on what I talked about a few minutes ago. The top 4 open primary with ranked choice voting is the best form of open primary. It's the best way to open the primary. That's what we strongly believe. And let me walk you through why that is. So there's 3 different ways that have been on the table to open the primary. The first would simply be to go back to Idaho's old system of open primary. So people naturally say, why don't you just go back to the old? Why aren't we proposing just going back to the old system? That'd be the simplest. We could get 80% of voters to agree with us on that. Well, the answer to that is simple. It's unconstitutional. So the old system was ruled unconstitutional in 2011. And it was ruled unconstitutional because what the federal court said is that as long as you have partisan primary elections that elect nominees of parties, though that is a private activity of a private club, a political party, which is a private organization, and they therefore have First Amendment rights of association to determine who can participate in their primary. So the state can't force them to open their primary. So that old system was ruled unconstitutional. It's not an option to go back to that. Okay, so now there's 2 other options on the table. One would be what we're going for, which is the Alaska model, which includes ranked choice voting and a top 4 primary. The other would be what they have in Washington and California, which is a top 2 open primary, where just the top 2 candidates go forward. The top 2 system is far less powerful than the top 4 system, and let me tell you why. In Washington and California, there's a lot of complaints that the top 2 system consistently nominates 2 candidates of the same party. And voters feel like they don't really have much choice. And so in Washington and California, that's often 2 Democrats, and anyone who's an independent or a Republican feels like they don't really have much choice in the general election because it's just 2 Democrats on the ballot. In Idaho, it would be the opposite. It'd be 2 Republicans most of the time. And anyone who's not Republican would kind of feel, maybe, possibly at least, many people would feel somewhat cynical, like they don't really have much of a choice. So that's a really serious criticism of the top 2 system. Another criticism of it is that because it narrows the choice all the way to just 2 candidates in the primary election, it actually gives a lot of power to that small number of people who show up to vote in primaries. And we want to go in the opposite direction. We want to make the primary less important. We want to actually make the general election the most important election, because we actually believe in democracy, and we believe that the more important election should be the one where more people show up to vote. And in Idaho, anywhere from 60 to 80% show up for the general election, where only between 20 and 30% show up for the primary election. So the top 2 systems still gives a lot of the power to that 20 to 30%. And by the time that 60 to 80% show up in November, it's already been narrowed to just 2 candidates. So that's where you can see it's so powerful to advance 4 candidates, because it makes the primary a lot less important. All you have to do to get through the primary is get in the top 4. But then the general is a very competitive election. and voters have a broad range of choices, and they show up in November and really feel like their vote matters because it's a competitive election with real choices. So that's the breakthrough of Alaska, is going to a top 4 system. But importantly, and this is the last thing I'll say, once you make that breakthrough and you go to a top 4 system, you have to have a way to make sure the vote doesn't get split 4 ways, and a winner can get someone can win with 30% of the vote. That's why you need ranked choice voting, or you need some type of runoff election. And ranked choice voting is a type of runoff election. So that's why Alaska has opted for the top 4 system with ranked choice. It's a major breakthrough. It's a big advance on the top 2 system in terms of how the positive impact it's had in Alaska and the positive impact it would have in Idaho.
That was a really clear explanation, Luke. Thank you, and very powerful. I think you've actually answered the next question. It said, Bill says, this sounds like a good idea. What does the opposition say about this process? So I think you've answered a lot of that, but is there anything else you want to say about what the opposition is
Yeah,
saying?
I'll point to 2 other arguments they're making that are getting some traction. I don't want to overstate, how persuasive they are, but for people, but couple other arguments have to do with the constitutionality, whether the system we're proposing is constitutional. The one of them is, and there's a new PAC that's opposing the initiative called One Person, One Vote. And the whole claim is that this violates one person, one vote because you're allowing people to vote 4 times in a ranked choice system. Okay, that is false. In ranked choice voting, you're not voting 4 times. You are ranking 4 candidates, but your vote only counts once. When everything is tallied, your vote only counts once. And if you think back to my explanation earlier, you can see why that is, because as I described, what happens in the instant runoff is a candidate gets eliminated. If that was your top choice, your vote now goes to your next choice. So your vote now counts towards a different candidate, and your vote, in the final tally will not be tallied for that original candidate. It's tallied for the other candidate. So, importantly, and this might be the easiest answer to this without getting into that whole explanation I just did, the courts have looked closely at this claim that it violates one person, one vote, and they rejected it. So in both the federal courts in the Ninth Circuit in 2011 and recently in the Alaska Supreme Court, Alaska State Supreme Court, they found in ranked choice elections, every person has 1 vote. And they rejected the claim that it violates one person, one vote. The other big constitutional challenge is that one other big one at least is that it results in ballots being thrown out. So this is a problem you'll hear thrown around called ballot exhaustion. And the claim is this. The claim is that if you only choose to rank one candidate, for example, and your candidate gets eliminated, then there's no other candidate for your vote to go to. So your vote is not going to impact that final contest, say between the top 2 remaining candidates, because you only voted for you only ranked one of the least competitive candidates. They got eliminated. So your ballot has been exhausted is the technical term for it. Now, what opponents claim is that process is the equivalent of your ballot being thrown out and you being disenfranchised. Federal courts have looked at this same claim, and they've rejected it. They've said, no, ranked choice voting does not disenfranchise voters. It does not throw out ballots. And what the federal court has pointed out is that when you have an exhausted ballot in a ranked choice election, all that's really happening is a voter is casting a vote for a candidate who was not one of the most competitive candidates. And they didn't rank any of the candidates who were the most competitive. And what the court has said is that is essentially the same thing as when you show up, under a traditional system and you vote for a candidate who doesn't have a chance of winning. So for example, in Idaho, you vote for a third party candidate. They almost never have a real chance of winning, but you vote for them because you think it's, the best person for the job, or they share your values. So you vote for them. But your vote's not going to go, they're not going to be one of the most competitive candidates in the race. And some people will say, you'll hear people say, right, don't vote for a third party candidate because you're throwing your vote away, right? You'll hear people say that. They don't mean by that, though, that you're being disenfranchised or that something unconstitutional is happening when you vote for a third party. They're just saying you're not voting for one of the more competitive candidates. So that's exactly what happens with exhausted ballots. And I'll just back up and say a really important point. If our opponents really want a system where the vote of every person really matters, and where if they want a system where more voters have more of an impact on the election, by that standard, the closed primary system is a disaster. And if they want to argue that some voters in a ranked choice system will have somewhat less of an impact than other voters, let's use that same standard to evaluate the closed primary system, where about 80% of the voters don't have a real impact because they're not voting in the closed Republican primary, including the majority of Republican voters, by the way, don't vote in the primary. So, that's really important to put in context. If you're going to scrutinize ranked choice voting over the question of whether every voter has the same type of final impact on the election, you got to evaluate the closed primary under that same standard.
Okay, good. We have one more question in the chat. This is also from Zena. What other Idaho organizations back the proposition?
Good. So it is a broad coalition, Idahoans for Open Primaries. It includes Reclaim Idaho as one part of it. It's also Veterans for Idaho Voters, which is a group that emerged here in the a little over a year ago now, of military veterans who really highlight that about half of all veterans are independent voters. So when you're talking about when you're talking about really diminishing the voice of independent voters under the current closed primary, you're talking about a lot of veterans. So they really highlight that point and support Proposition 1 for that reason. We've also got Mormon Women for Ethical Government. That's a group that has chapters in many different states, and the Idaho chapter it has been in full support since very early on. We have a group of over 100 Republican community leaders who joined a group called Republicans for Open Primaries, and that was originally started by a few former elected officials, including former Attorney General and Chief Justice Jim Jones and former Republican Speaker of the House Bruce Newcomb. And then former Governor Butch Otter also joined that group and endorsed the initiative. Beyond that, we've got a lot of different, local groups that have joined along the way and supported the initiative in different ways, and a whole lot of organizations that have, helped get the word out to their members and supported the initiative in however they can. So it's been a very broad coalition effort, and the coalition, we're really proud of the fact that the coalition really reflects Idaho in the breadth of it.
Okay. So I just want to take a second here. There are no other questions in the chat right now. So if anybody has another question, please enter it into the chat or raise your virtual hand and I'll unmute you. And I'm not seeing any. Okay. Luke, do you have any last minute thoughts or additional information you'd like to share with us that you haven't already covered?
Well, I'd like to just thank you all, and I'd like to say, and I will speak to that comment that just now came in.
Okay, all right,
I'd like to
good.
say that anything you can do to just share any information you've learned, today on the call, out in the community, because our number one goal overall, especially with, presentations like this, is just to make sure that when people show up to vote in November, they're actually casting an educated vote and they know what the initiative is. So any of just the basic information you can share about this initiative, and I know that the league has been, throughout its history nationally and here locally, that's been a critical civic function, is just civic education, making sure that voters understand the issues. So in that spirit, if you can do that between now and November, that's a great thing. If you're in a position where you are curious about getting more involved, you can go to yesforopenprimaries.com. And there's different ways to plug into the process, whether it's through phone banking, door knocking, going to an event and sitting at a table and engaging voters that way. There's just going to be a lot of opportunities between now and November 5th to talk to voters about the importance of this initiative. I see the question, are we feeling optimistic about this passing?
Yeah.
Yes, we are. We do believe we're going to win. But I will say we also believe it's going to be close. There's one big headwind, is that, ultimately, the official who wrote the ballot titles, who will actually go on the ballot, was Attorney General Raul Labrador, who's a fierce opponent of the initiative. We did file a lawsuit early on, and we won, and the court ordered Labrador to improve the titles and make them a little bit better, but they're still not ideal. And it still is the case that if voters just show up on election day, and if they haven't heard anything about this initiative and they just go to the voting booth, it's a real coin flip and they could vote no. So we do believe that if we get our message out between now and November, we're going to win. If we reach voters with our message, if the majority of voters go into the voting booth having some understanding of what this is about, we're going to win. And that's cause for optimism for me. I would say, Bill, to your final question, will moderates have their voice heard easier in the process? For us, this initiative at its core is not about moderates. It's really about every voter. And but that includes moderates, right? But really, what's really important for us is that every citizen should have a voice. And it's a serious problem if you have a system of representative government where whole blocks of voters just don't really have a real impact on the election. We want everyone to have a voice. And I think an argument could be made that the way the system is set up now, perhaps a whole lot of moderates are independents and they're being shut out of the process. And perhaps that's true. But in the end, this is not about the political spectrum. This reform is something that can be supported by people anywhere on the political spectrum, whether you're on the left, the right, the middle. because all you have to believe in to believe that this reform is the right thing to do is that every citizen should have a voice. And it doesn't matter if you're on the left, the right, or the center. And that's part of why we're hopeful about what's going to happen on November 5th, because we can build around this reform in these final days. We can build a broad-based voter coalition representing voters all across the political spectrum, and win big on election day. So thank you all so much. Please do check out yesforopenprimaries.com if you want to learn more.
All right. Thank you, Luke. We had a question just for everyone's information, whether or not this presentation has been recorded, and it has. So it will be available to people who weren't able to attend. And I really appreciate your clear explanations, Luke. This is really informed people in a really positive and clear way about the initiative. So thank you for making time. I know you're really busy and you're on the road and you're doing these town hall meetings, and we really appreciate your taking time to be with us today. So thank you.
Thank you all. Thanks, Lauren. Thanks to the league.
All right, and I will end the meeting now. Okay.